Welcome to the Home Building Hub, your essential podcast guide to building your new home. Hosted by industry experts Colin Bischoff and Darren Brennan, this conversational podcast will help better educate you about all things new home building so you can avoid costly mistakes and enjoy your building experience to the fullest, no matter which home builder you choose.
Hey there, folks. Welcome to the Home Building Hub. You are with Colin and co-host Darren Brennan, as always. Today, Daz, we're going to talk about a little topic that people don't really even bother considering. And that's because there's so much to factor in when you're talking about land, you're talking about houses, talking about facades and site costs and promotions. A lot of confusion, but this one gets left alone quite often. So today we're going to talk about how trees can impact your build. So, Darren, there's definitely more your department. I'm going to prompt you with some questions because I'd like to know the answers, and let's see what we come up with, and that'll better educate anyone listening to this podcast. Just to consider some of these things would be very, very valuable. So, Dazza,
Absolutely.
how are you today, buddy? You good?
Good, mate. Yeah, let's rock straight into it. I reckon this should be a really short, sharp little episode, but it's certainly really relevant to people who are looking at building, and it does cover a whole lot of different situations. So yeah, let's rip in. What's the questions you got for me, mate?
Question number one: why did you go for the Essendon Bot? No. Question number one: how do trees have an impact on your house slab?
Absolutely. I guess to start with, the roots, obviously, as the tree grows, get larger. As they get larger, they can lift the ground, and hence that can do damage to your home, right? And it can lift your home. If you consider you'll might often walk over a footpath and you're seeing where the tree roots have lifted that, that's a great example of exactly that happening. They can draw water out of the ground, and again, so which may see you might have a tree on one side of your house and not on the other. That may see that side of the house become very dry, and the other side of the house can be actually quite wet because it's got nothing in soaking up that water. And again, that can cause movement to your house slab. Um, they can cause problems that, such as termites. So again, you've got a tree that gets attacked by termites. Those termites run out of chewing that tree. They decide to chew your house now, and they work their way into your home. So that can be an issue. It's not something you come across a lot, but again, it's not something that's often considered when you've got trees around. They can drop leaves and bark onto your roof and into your gutters, again, blocking your gutters, blocking your stormwater, causing other issues there. So that's another consideration. They can do damage to storm water pipes and sewer pipes as they seek water. Trees need water to grow. They're seeking that water. If they find a weak point in, when those pipes have been glued together, they will work their way into those pipes. Again, we used to see it a lot more with clay pipes on old houses, but it can also be an issue if those pipes haven't been glued together properly, that the trees do go seeking that water. So there's some of the things that can actually happen, and that's not limited to just those, but they're probably some of the more common ones.
Yeah, yeah, it's interesting. I mean, you wouldn't think trees have such an impact. I mean, and to factor and consider that into a new build, particularly when we're mainly talking about, I suppose, greenfield estates in my example there.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting, but I guess we'll cover a bit more of that shortly. But let's think about, I guess, that exact thing, like a tree that's planted by a developer. No, sorry, I've jumped ahead there, Darren. We'll hold
Right.
that one. What about removed trees? So, what sort of impact can they have if on the house slab if that tree has been removed?
For sure. I'll give you a couple of different examples. So, if you've got a brand new estate, that estate might have been a paddock, and in that paddock might have been a tree. So, the developer, as part of developing the estate, removed that tree. Um, then that tree would be considered for up to 2 years and possibly longer by the engineer when they're considering the slab design. So that removed tree, although you don't even know it was there, they'll go back through satellite imagery and see that it was there and go, hold on, there was a tree there. It was only a year ago that it was removed. We need to make consideration around your slab for potential slab movement due to that tree being there. So, you know, what happens is when that tree is first removed, the soil remains fairly dry, right? And that's just natural for that area. It can be what we call hydrophobic because it's been drawing all the moisture out. It doesn't allow water in, so the water just runs off, meaning that the soil repels water. Often the ground at that stage is retracting, it's shrinking, right? So because that's the natural drying out is that shrinking sort of scenario. Um, if you dig the roots out, obviously, then naturally you've got a hole there that again is going to need to be filled, and that often will shrink as well as that beds down and becomes more hard over time. Um, then you look at sort of that progression from there. There's still tree roots left in the ground. They're now dead. They begin to rot. As they begin to rot, um, what actually happens is the soil itself starts to take in that water, right? Because it's got microorganisms breaking down all of those tree roots. That's becoming organic matter. The organic matter starts to hold moisture. That moisture then causes swelling, right? This is when the problems start to happen, essentially. And that's the bit that the engineers are worried about is when the swelling's happening. And when that happens, that's what causes things like slab heave, and that's a real issue for your slab. So we don't want to be in that position. And as I mentioned, a tree being removed could be an issue for up to a couple of years. The other part is if your neighbour chops down a tree, so you're here, they've had a house there for a while, they chop down a tree, that can have an impact on your home. So, there's so many of these considering factors with trees. And that's not talking about, for example, if you're in a knockdown rebuild area and the council may say you can't knock down that tree, it's significant to the area. You need a permit, to protect the tree. You've got tree protection works to put in. So there's a whole lot of other stuff that can happen depending on your type of build that needs to be considered. You also see people going, well, I've got this whopping big tree on my block and I want to build right up next to it because it has all the shade. It'll be amazing. And you're right, all those things will be amazing except for the impact it has on the slab of the home. So again, from a builder point of view, you want to be away from the trees.
Yeah, quite interesting. Yeah, it's good point. Something that I hadn't really factored in myself, to be honest, Darren. But what about in the developments in the greenfields,
Yep.
which I jumped ahead to earlier accidentally? When a street tree is planted by your developer, can that cause any issues?
Yeah, again, depending on how big the tree is going to get, I guess is really the answer. So the engineers certainly would consider a street tree there, particularly if they've gone out there to do the soil test and surveys and stuff, and they've seen the tree there. They say, well, there's clearly a tree here. We've got to consider that in when we're designing the house slab. So um, when that's the case, they're often what they do to offset any cost, offset any cause of issues is they'll put piers in and make the slab basically beef the slab up. So they might put deep in edge beams around a slab. So again, more concrete essentially and steel, put piers in, more concrete and steel potentially. That all costs money. If you're on a normal block, you might just have one tree out the front. So they're considering that tree. But if you're on a corner lot, there might be two down the side of the house. And again, often you're set back 4 meters from a street or further. So you're sort of 4 or 5 meters from the tree. But on a corner lot, you might only be 2 meters from it. So 2 meters from that corner. So you might only be 3 meters from the tree. So they've got to consider what that looks like. What else have we got here? Just looking at some of my notes to make sure I don't miss any, Cole. Finding out the actual species of the tree is often a really good thing to do because it'll tell you how big the tree is going to get, and then the engineers will consider based on the actual tree, not a assumed super big tree. So you might have a tree that's only going to get to 3 meters tall. That's very different to a tree that's going to get to 20 meters tall, right? An example to that would be, as a rule of thumb, the engineers would be 1.5 times the mature height of the tree is the radius of which the root ball is going to impact the soil area in that. So if you've got a 20-meter high tree, 1.5 meters times, that's 30 meters. It could nearly be from the whole front of your house to the back of your house because your house might not be 30 meters away to the back of the home from that tree. So they'll consider that and then design the slab accordingly, beef it up with more steel, more concrete, as we said, and that's going to come at a cost.
Mm. That's interesting. Yeah, so 1.5 times the mature height of the tree. So in an
Correct. So right
estate,
now the tree could be
what's an
meter,
average?
meter and a
Yeah.
half, but it's going to get to 20. So they consider it at 20.
So in an estate, you wouldn't be looking at trees that high, but they'd hit a few meters though, wouldn't they?
Be 5, 6, 7 meters.
Yeah.
It's not that high. It's not the
Yeah.
size of a power line.
So if it's 5 meters high, then you're talking about 7.5 meters as a
Correct.
radius of what it's going to come out. So yeah, if your house slab's sitting in that radius, then you're saying engineering plans will factor that in and be
Spot
built
on.
and priced accordingly. So
Correct.
yeah, that's a very, very important one. Yeah, so you talked about the neighbours' lots. It's the same impact, but what about after you've built, Darren? What about planting a tree after you've built? I assume we're factoring in the same sort of thing you've just mentioned, but is there anything else to consider there?
I guess the engineers can only design the slab based on the information they know. So they don't know you're planting a tree later. They don't design the slab accordingly. And therefore, you expose yourself to potential risks of that tree doing damage to your home. So, certainly we wouldn't be recommending building, planting big trees near your home at any stage. But if you go and refer to the CSIRO, how to care for your house slab, it references trees in there and gives you advice around what to do and what not to do, and that's to help avoid you voiding your builder's warranty. And that's the last thing you want to do is
Mm,
find out that you've got this great warranty that comes to your home, but you void it because you've decided you want to plant a tree with whopping big roots that's going to get hugely tall and starts doing damage to your home. So,
yeah, yeah, okay, it's good. So
yeah,
perhaps to wrap it up, let's talk about I guess some final points and some considerations that you could share just to keep in mind for our listeners. Yeah.
for sure. And as we said, short, sharp episode at the start, so it's certainly ending up to be that, Cole. But um, if there are trees next to or near home, then your builder needs to consider that as part of the slab design. Their engineers will usually provide piers or deepen edge beams as a precaution for future damage, right? So they're really trying to avoid the damage in the future. Um, if they believe there'll be slab heave, meaning that the ground's going to lift, they will often weld those piers to the slab. That's an unusual situation. Normally, the piers are there and they just sit the slab on top, and there's enough weight that the weight of the house sitting on top of those piers is enough. But if they feel there's going to be heave, they'll actually attach and weld those piers to the slab of the home, making it even harder for any tree or anything or the soil lifting to lift that house, because it's got to lift those piers out of the ground as well. So that's one part they'll do. They will always be cautious, the engineers, that is. And if in doubt, they will look to future proof the slab of your home. The last thing they want to do is be found to be negligent because they haven't considered that tree. So, hence why, if they don't know what the tree is, they'll say it's going to get 20 meters tall, right? They'll consider a worse case scenario and make sure the upside in that is your slab's generally going to be beefed up more. So, you're going to end up with a better slab because they're making greater assumptions than potentially are required. Um, we mentioned earlier the mature height of the tree. The radius of the root ball of that tree is generally about 1.5 times the height of the tree. So if the tree is 20 meters high, they'll consider a 30-meter root ball. And that can be the case. You could have some big pine trees over your back fence. Well, in a subdivision next door, farm next door, whatever that might have been, they could be having significant impact on your home. Um, I guess one misconception is that tree roots are really deep. So if the tree's really tall, the roots are really deep. It's actually not necessarily the case. Generally speaking, tree roots are only down to about a metre. They need air. So they need to be near the surface to get air. The deeper they go, the less air there is. Sometimes they may throw down a taproot, but again, even that's rare, right? So a taproot might be a tree sends down one root to try and get to water, right? And because it needs air and water. Taproots, you don't often see them, and because they're getting enough air and water from the surface, so they don't need to. Removing a tree can actually be worse than keeping the tree, right? So understanding that that's the case, consult your builder and their engineers before chopping down the tree, particularly big trees. If it's a small tree, not as much impact. Big tree, big impact. So sort of be mindful that that's the case. So if you're thinking, I'll just chop the tree down before I start building, talk to your builder, talk to their engineer, and understand what impact that's going to have on the soil. Trees can fall over and damage your home. So again, if you've got big trees near your home, or you're thinking of planting a big tree near your home, understand in heavy weather they can fall over. Gum trees in still weather on a hot day can drop big limbs. They just say, this limb is costing me too much water. I'm going to drop a limb, and it'll drop a big limb, and that can do significant damage. And it can be no wind at all. It just drops a limb in the middle of a still day. Trees close to the home will cost you money, right? If they're being considered as part of your slab, often lots of money. So you may need to add piers, additional concrete, as we've spoken about. This could cost you $10,000 or more. So just be aware of it. All we're trying to say here is talk to your builder about impact of trees. Read the CSIRO document to understand what your obligations are around your warranty, right? Keep big trees away from the home where possible, and you're going to be in better shape. And that's probably it for the day, mate.
Very nice. So I guess we've done pretty well to navigate this episode, to be honest with you. So Darren's got a background in horticulture, correct, Daz? That's the right
Correct.
term. So he
Correct.
knows a fair bit more than the average bear on this topic. Sales consultants won't be able to explain, I'd say, 80% of what Darren just said. So hopefully, thank you for that value there you've given. Secondary, I've got someone building next door and they're just banging and crashing like crazy people. So we've had to click mute left, right, and center. So we've actually navigated through this one pretty well. Short and sharp, but not necessarily so simple. But thanks, Daz, for sharing that. Hopefully everyone has received some really good value there. Just some considerations, I suppose. That's for sure. So
awesome, mate.
That's good. Let's wrap it up there. If you like what you're listening to, jump on a platform that you're on and give us a 5-star review. Please, if you've got any questions, feedback, topic ideas, then send us an email, hello@homebuildinghub.com.au, and jump on the website if you want to see a whole bunch of other episodes. That's homebuildinghub.com.au. Thanks, guys. We'll see you on the next one.
Beautiful. Cheers. Thanks for listening to the podcast, guys. And just our disclaimer, whilst we're all about providing value to you, this podcast should not be considered as legal or financial advice. It contains general information only, and you should seek out independent professional advice on your personal situation before making any legal or financial decisions.
1, 2,